There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you in part by the generosity of our friends at the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City. I'm your host, Frank Bowl. We talk about the people, places, and things that make Kansas City such a great place to live, work, and raise your family. I can't tell you how happy I am to have this guy sitting across from me today, my old friend, my old good buddy from my channel 4 days, and now the publisher of the KC Hispanic News, the one and only Joe Arce. Joe, how are you, my friend?
Thanks for having me, Frank. I'm fine. Been very busy, but doing well.
Yeah. You know, your career is so interesting because, you know, we worked together for a long time at Channel 4. You started there in 1971, and I think you then started the KC Hispanic News in 1996. But I got there in 1981, 10 years after you had already been there. You were pretty well established by that point of who you were and what you were doing. But they were the golden years of TV, weren't they? I mean,
absolutely.
It was a great time to work in television.
Absolutely.
Unlike today.
Yeah, so true. You know, and we all worked really hard to make that station number one. You know, it was a team effort. You know, I'm very proud of the years that I spent there, and also with you as well, because I mean, we covered a lot of sports back in those days.
Yeah, we did. We did between the Chiefs and the Royals. We never got to cover a Super Bowl, but we covered. You ended up covering 2 World Series.
That's true.
With the Royals before you left.
Absolutely.
And then I covered 85, but you had covered 1980. I got there in 81, but I covered the 85 World Series and the Rose Garden at the White House in Washington, D.C.
That's true.
The whole thing, for the big celebration.
Right.
It was a lot of fun. Let's talk a little bit about your career. How did you get into the business to begin with, to get into the media end of the business?
You know, I was working at that time Southwestern Bell, which is AT&T.
And you had not you right after you graduated from high school, right?
Correct.
You went to work for Southwestern Bell.
Exactly. Well, no, exactly. I was at Southwestern Bell. Spent a couple of years there, and then I had a friend of mine that actually was a friend of my father's, and his name was Ray Rodriguez, and he called me one day and says, you know, there's an opening at Fox 4 News, and you know, it's kind of like at the bottom of the barrel, but you can work your way up pretty fast if you have that initiative. And so he said, well, let's go and check it out. And so I thought one day, well, I don't know about this. It's not in my, it's not my field.
Right.
And I didn't feel that comfortable going, but I thought, what the hell?
What were you doing at Southwestern Bell?
Actually, my title was a lineman.
Really? You climbing poles, Joe?
Well, they wanted me to climb poles. Luckily, I was loaned out to another department called Frameman, and so I was in a frame. And then my boss told me one day, he says, you know, they loaned you to this department. They can pull you at any time. Go back out there and be a lineman. And I go, oh, no, I don't want to be out there in the cold. That's not for me.
Right. So now all of a sudden, what was the job opening at Channel 4?
The opening was for film processing. And they would be willing to train me. And so a person by the name of Don Keogh, he was the person that hired me, and so rest his soul. He just passed away a couple of years ago, but he saw something, I guess, in me that he felt as though that maybe I could do the job. Again, no training whatsoever going in, but I knew that I could do the job, and so I did it for a couple of years, and then I gradually moved up to film editing, and then from there went to shooting video and film. We had
on film. I don't think what people realize now, because get everything from their phone or whatever, is that now you're in the process. You're shooting 16 millimeter film, correct?
Absolutely.
In the beginning, so you're shooting film, and you've got a story. You're not going to be out there in the back of a truck, okay, editing your piece on a computer. Okay, you've got to bring that film back, take it off of the camera.
Go to the dark room.
Go to the dark room, okay, and process all the film.
Exactly.
And then bring the film up and start going through.
And editing.
And edit the film and hot splice. And I mean, it was such a different world then.
It was. In fact, some of the newer journalists, or photojournalists, they get out there, some of them don't even know what B-roll, where the work came from. But it actually came from film.
Yeah.
And a lot of the new college students that come in, they never heard of that word. They get to learn that word as they're working.
Yeah.
But those are the type of things that they learn. But I will tell you this: in '71, when I was hired, I believe it was the following year, within the 9 to 6 months after I was hired, we were on a death watch for Harry S. Truman.
Yes.
You remember that?
Wow.
And NBC hired me, and so they put me on call. And so I spent several weeks, 7 days a week. I was getting paid by 4, and also from NBC.
Double dipping already.
Yes,
absolutely. You're talking about being one of the original entrepreneurs. There you go.
Because they wanted to make sure that I was available to process that film the moment that he passed.
Yeah.
So I felt as though I was playing an important role.
Oh yeah. In history.
Exactly. So but what happened was that. I had an opportunity, had some great mentors there at Fox 4 News. Mike McDonald in particular was one of my probably.
He hired me. He and Earl Beale.
That's great. He gave me opportunities because you have to remember, I didn't have the opportunity to go to college because I had lost my dad at a very young age. I was 15 years old, finished school, high school, but I had to work. I had to help my mom. And so, fortunately, I knew that I had to try to move up the ranks, and so I was given opportunities that maybe that somebody else wouldn't have given me by being at Fox 4 News. So when we talk about a college degree, I always say that I got my degree from Fox 4, the University of Fox 4 News.
There you go. Yeah, in the basement too, where you had to process all the film. Right?
Absolutely.
I remember going down there when I first got there because they had all of that 16 millimeter film down there.
Exactly.
And it was
our archives.
It was, but what the stuff they had was the Truman and all the old archives from the beginning of TV. Because I think Fox 4 was the first.
We were the first television station in Kansas City. We were owned by the Kansas City Star.
Right, and one of the first west of the Mississippi River. I think there was one in St. Louis, and then there was Fox 4. So you had archival material that was just the historical, and I remember just a few years ago, talking about, we're going to clean out the basement. I said, you guys are crazy. Don't clean out the basement. I said, get that stuff processed and put onto some permanent, archive that you can go back to. And that stuff was just invaluable. And you talk about growing up. You grew up in Kansas City. You grew up on the west side, right?
Absolutely. God's country, I call it.
God's country. And you lost your dad at a young age. And I think were you 12, 13 years old? Right in there
I was 15 years old when I
years
lost my father.
Right.
And so, and my mother had warned me. She says, she goes, I need to tell you that if you get into any trouble whatsoever, I can't go bail you out. You got 3 sisters still at home. So if you're going to get into any trouble, you better, I just cannot go get you out of jail if you end up in jail. Luckily, I didn't end up in jail.
Yeah, right. Well, you certainly did well. That's for sure. So you're at Channel 4 and you're doing all this stuff. When did you become a full-fledged photog there? And then I think I'm going to call you the original one-man band.
I was?
Yeah, you're the original guy. Nowadays, all these guys, they're all just
doing what I was doing back then.
What you were doing back then. Just one person goes out, they shoot it, they set up their own live shots, they edit it all and the whole thing. But you were doing that way back. When did you first pick up a camera at Fox 4?
Probably, I picked up the film camera probably in 73 until 76. And the reason I remember 76 because the camera that came out for video was TK-76, and that's what they named it. And so right around 76, 77, I was sent to the airport to cover Richard Nixon coming into town for a fundraiser. And so I had all this gear on me, big old battery belt, lights, camera, microphone. I could barely get my hand up there.
Secret Services.
Secret Service were pulling on me. And they were telling me things like, no, you can't get too close to the president. So finally I pulled a Sam Donaldson. You're old enough to remember Sam Donaldson.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hollered a question out at him. He came towards me. And the Secret Service was so mad at me for that. But I was able to get an interview with Nixon. And I was able to bring it back, and everybody said, well, did you get some B-roll of him out there? And I go, yeah, but I got an interview, too. It led the newscast.
Yeah, and it not only did it lead the newscast, but it was on national news.
Yeah.
It led one of the national newscasts as well.
Yeah.
That you were doing. So you already had the Harry Truman thing in your back pocket. Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden you have Richard Nixon in your back pocket. You're doing okay, Joe. You're climbing the ladder pretty quick. You know what I mean?
So. And they relied on me. I think Mike McDonald and the rest of the crew, they knew what I was capable of doing. They could send me out and knew that I was going to come back with something. What I learned also in television, you don't go out and cover a story and come back with nothing. You got to come back with something.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and so I was able to, always go up and get an interview from someone. Now, I'll be honest with you, Frank, sometimes people didn't like that. My competitors.
Some people didn't want to talk.
No, not just people. I'm talking about my competitors.
Absolutely.
They did not like me doing that at all because they were afraid, if Joe's doing it, he's supposed to be a photojournalist, not doing any reporting. They were afraid it was going to be put upon them to do the same thing. What happens, here some 25 years later, they're doing what I'm doing now. But, it was a great experience for me, and that's what allowed me to start Kansas City Hispanic News in 1996.
Yeah, well, and you were in TV still at that point, and you're going to go through the whole 80s before you get to the 90s. You start there before you get to the 90s. So the deal is you are doing all these things, and it has to be in the back of your mind somewhere that there's a lot of news here to do in Kansas City, but nobody is doing Hispanic news or news on the Latino community.
We had one publication that was doing it, but what made my newspaper different than theirs was the fact that I wanted to do local news. This is all I knew was local news, and it's fine to have some international news, but if I was going to take if I was going to do a story on something that was going on in a foreign country or something like that, I wanted to localize it, whether it be from Mexico or Cuba or something like that, so I would have a little bit of that information plus a local reaction to that. So those are the type of things that we were doing in order to do international news along with localizing the story.
Right. So when you're doing the TV thing, okay, you're up there, Mike McDonald wants you to go back with something. If there's something that happens nationally, I think most of the TV stations back in those days, well, how does this impact us?
Yes.
And then we would go out and try to get that story on local impact of this national news story, get some local reaction or whatever. And I think you took that with you to KC Hispanic News. It's the same thing. You have all these national stories, and okay, how do they impact the people on the west side or in the northeast?
Exactly.
Or whatever. How do
because
they?
Those were the things that we talked about in the 9 o'clock newsroom meeting. At times, if you had a story here in the Hispanic community, people would, and including Mike McDonald, he would say, well, how does that impact the people in Olathe or Independence? So you had to figure that out.
Yeah, and that was the basis for, the Hispanic
the report.
News.
Yeah.
And as you got to a point, when did you get to a point that you decided, I have to do something else for my community? I mean, it's a great feeling to rise the way you did at Channel 4 from where you came from with no college education. By the way, we'll get into, I should be calling you Dr. Joe Arce, but I've been remiss, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the situation was you had no college education. You're in this with all these college-educated people, whatever. You got a great job. You've found sort of a niche at Channel 4. It's pretty good to have that check coming in every 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
You don't have to worry about it. You got a big corporation working, and you got health care, and you got the whole thing going, Joe. And all of a sudden you decide, you know what, I've got to stretch this out some way. That was, I would like to heard the conversation with you and your wife, Ramona, your wonderful wife, when you sat down and said, hon, I'm thinking about doing this.
And let me tell you, it was not 100% in support of me doing it because, as you pointed out, I was comfortable at Fox 4 News. I had 25, 26 years there. I wasn't going anywhere. And at the same time, I was safe, so to speak.
Sure.
And but the thing of it was that I did some soul searching. And at times I would think about, maybe I ought to get into real estate. I didn't know a damn thing about real estate.
Sell cars.
Exactly. I didn't even know. I wasn't even a mechanic. I didn't know how to fix a car. So the only thing I knew was that I felt as though that I knew was news, and I thought, well, I might as well take advantage of it. But my wife was very, very worried about me, going from Fox 4 to my own business. And I had done some research, but that doesn't guarantee you anything. It's so easy to open up a business, but it's so hard to keep your doors open.
Yeah, right, exactly. And before we leave the TV and go into KC Hispanic News, we're right on cusp there were many people at Channel 4 when you were there that said, oh, you got the job because you were Hispanic. Okay,
that's a fact.
And then
I didn't know it.
Right. And then others said, oh, you're never going to make it.
I was told that.
Mm-hmm.
I was told that.
And you rose above all of those things because of your work ethic at that point.
In fact, one person that told me that, on my retirement day, when I left Channel 4, came up to me and apologized to me for that.
That's all the affirmation you need, Joe, is right there. You know
Right.
what I mean? So were you double dipping a little bit with Channel 4 too in the KC Hispanic News? How did you get that started and off the ground?
In 1996, I announced to Mike McDonald that I was leaving to start this newspaper, but he didn't realize that I had already kind of not launched it, but in the beginnings of launching the paper. But he said to me, "Well, you're not going anywhere." And I go, "What do you mean I'm not going anywhere?" He says, "I don't want you to leave yet." And so he said, "I got some assignments, so I want you to go cover." One was going to cover the second inauguration of President Clinton. Mm-hmm. So I covered that, and I worked for about another year at Fox 4 News, and it was extremely difficult. I was putting in 40 hours there, plus putting in another 30 to 40 hours in my own business. So it took a toll on me. So after a year, I finally had to announce that I was leaving. And it was a good time for me, but it was a blessing at the same time because it allowed me to grow my business. I had no advertisers when I first started my newspaper.
You were on a wing and a prayer, Joe.
I was. Luckily that year that I had that I was working at Fox 4 News plus having the paper, I had income coming in, so that really helped a lot.
Right, and there was competition, right? Dos Mundos was...
Sure, they were established.
Right, they'd been established for how long?
About 10 years.
And why did you believe that the Kansas City area needed 2 Hispanic newspapers, not just one?
Well, I asked myself if television station, we had 4 television stations in Kansas City. So what's 2 newspapers, It's just 2 different points of view if you go cover the same story.
But we already had 2 newspapers, too, at that time.
Yeah. So, I felt as though that, it's a different perspective, from one story to the other. I mean, you turn on all the television stations, they may take a different angle on a certain story. So I thought, well, I can probably do this as well. And we move forward with it.
Yeah, and you probably had a lot of people in your community who were saying, Joe, that sounds great. I think, we could back you.
Absolutely, Frank.
And you were going to need that.
In 1995, before even McDonald knew this, I had set up a little booth down at the city market. And a friend of mine had called me. He was having a fiesta. And he says, "Joe, would you mind emceeing the fiesta?" And I said, "Yeah, but can I have a booth so I can promote my newspaper?" And so I had no prototype of anything. I just had a sign saying, "Coming, Kansas City Hispanic News." And people believed in me, and all of a sudden people wanted to buy a subscription to our newspaper. Mm-hmm. So my sister comes to me on stage as I'm emceeing, and she said, "Do you have change for a 50? Somebody just gave me 50. They wanted to buy a subscription." I walked out of there with about $200 to $300 and no prototype. It was just like
you had no newspaper.
I had no newspaper.
It was the ghost paper at that
exactly.
point, right? Yeah, right. But also double dipping at that time, that did give you a little financial base.
Oh, absolutely.
To run your newspaper early on, right?
Yeah, I am so grateful for that.
Right, and since that time, it has just grown in leaps and bounds. I don't think people realize that there's between 225 and 250,000 Hispanic Latino people who live in the greater Kansas City metro area, right? Yeah. And they're spread out all over. When
I first started, Frank, it was only about 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Here now, 26 years later, it has grown so much, and not just in the Hispanic community. We have Hispanics everywhere. Olathe, Lenexa, Overland Park, the Northeast area, Independence, north of the river, you name it. We're everywhere.
Right, yeah. You have little enclaves everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Barrios, right? You have the little barrios,
yes.
And the people end up living together in those areas. Yeah, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So what have you found have been the biggest challenges for you as far as the newspaper is concerned? And we'll talk about COVID. But early on, before we get to COVID, what were some of the real challenges that you had to face?
Small publications have a difficult time hiring people because you don't have the funding to hire a lot of people. So I had a couple of reporters. There is so much news to cover here. In fact, I remember when I first started the newspaper, when people were doing a story on us starting the newspaper, one reporter asked me, "Well, is there enough Hispanic news in Kansas City? Why would you want to start a newspaper?" Yes, there's a lot of Hispanic news in Kansas City, a lot of stories to cover. Mm-hmm. People sometimes would mention to me, "Well, you're the voice for us." And I go, No. I am the messenger of information, but your voice is in our newspaper, but you're the voice.
Yeah, right. That's a way. It's a great way to approach it. So as you're going along and things are growing for you, and you have, you're in and out with reporters or whatever, because, they'll get there just like we should do in TV. We get our resumes together, and then you notice in TV how people leave and move on. And
Sure.
Some of the people that work for you, bottom rung of the ladder, coming in, learning how to do it, whatever, and then they use that resume and then they move on.
Absolutely.
And trying to replace them is very difficult.
Oh, sometimes it is. In fact, I had one reporter that was with me for 20 years, and she passed. Her name was Deborah DeCoster, and great reporter. But when I first hired her, because she wasn't Hispanic, she says, Joe, she goes, I'm not sure if the community is going to accept me. And I says, Deborah, I go, it's not a matter that you're not Hispanic. I go, you're to go out there and do a report and do your reporting. I go, that's what really, really counts. I go, more so than being Hispanic, black, or whatever. I hired a mixture of people based on their qualifications, not based on their race. And so it took a little while to get used to us. But, when she passed, people really appreciated her, that she had been there for 20 years. And they told me she understood our community. Mm-hmm. And she was from the Argentine area of Kansas City, Kansas.
Yeah, right. That's incredible, yeah. Mm-hmm. Because they're the kind of people you run across, people who really do want to help and really do want to stay, and then they find their niche.
Exactly.
Just like you had found yours, and just move from there.
I tell you, one of the challenges, though, for me was also being a bilingual newspaper, from English to Spanish, and then creating both. The first newspaper that I put out, believe it or not, it was all English. And I didn't want the criticism that came with translations. And, we had to tweak it a little bit. But within about a month, I was able to go bilingual and hire some great translators. And to this day, we really do, I think, a superb job translating from English to Spanish. And we put both languages in the newspaper.
Yeah, right, which is important to the community, too, because
they
still feel that touch of who they really are, and I think that's really important. Talk about some of the best things you've done. I know, tell us a little bit about the Primitivo Garcia's legacy and the story you did on him, and then the result of that story.
Well, I think that was back in, as I was leaving television, in fact, I think it was 96, and Primitivo Garcia's brother had come to me and says, Joe, he says, do you mind mentioning the fact that my brother's been gone for 25 years? And I said to him, well, let me look into this a little bit. Let me sit down and talk with you, because I need this a little bit of background, a little bit of history.
Yeah, find out about who he was.
Yeah, and I didn't know. I knew about it, but I was real young when that took place. And he was an individual that was attending an ESL program at Westport High School, him and his brother Alfredo. And so 25 years later, I thought, because of my television background, I thought, let's revisit the school. And Alfredo was with us, and I asked him to point out where this incident took place, which was an incident where their ESL teacher was being attacked, and there was an attempted rape at the same time there outside of Westport High School. So I took both Alfredo and Raul, and he showed me where this took place. He explained to me what had happened. And so I put together a 3-minute piece of the story of his life and how the impact that it had in the community 25 years ago.
He was the one that stepped in, and he ended up being the hero of the story. But
and at the same time, one of the things, the other brother, his name was Alfredo, that was with him, he was just as much as a hero as Primitivo was. No one knew that 25 years ago. And the reason no one knew that, because Alfredo did not want to take anything away from Primitivo, because he gave the ultimate sacrifice.
Right, he died.
But the person that was being attacked, she was the one that pointed that out to us. So here we were with some new information 25 years later about that. So the community, some community leaders took my 2-part series that I did down to the school district. And at that time, they had just built a new school. They were going to name it Westside Magnet School or something like that. And they asked the school board at that time if they would watch the video and if they would consider renaming that school after Primitivo Garcia. It just made sense.
Sure it did. Yeah.
And so...
especially where the school was as well.
Exactly.
Right
exactly. And he saved an educator.
Yes, he stayed English and Spanish language, yeah.
Yeah.
Or English as second language, yeah.
And so that same evening, after they reviewed probably about a week later, after they reviewed the video and what have you, it was an unanimous decision to rename that school after Primitivo Garcia. Yeah. I was sitting there among the family members, and the thing of it is that I knew them from a distance, but they loved me as a brother, as a family member. Primitivo Garcia's youngest sister always calls me brother, and
you were family.
I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they really appreciated that. And we still keep up with each other. We're best of friends even today, but it was just something I felt that, and then, we as journalists, we're not supposed to get too involved in these type of things, but, I had some connections with a person at TWA. We flew in the victim because the victim had moved to California. So when we had the initial ribbon cutting ceremony, we flew her in along with the baby that she was carrying at the same time. So it was a great celebration for everyone to see this school built. And as of today, it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there.
It's still there.
So, yeah, that's got to be a sense of pride. And I think that's also a sense of trust from the community. They knew you from TV, and then all of a sudden you're doing this as well. And there's just a certain trust. And because, let's face it, you're Hispanic. So, you're Mexican, and they can relate to that.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to open up to someone like that than it would be maybe if I'd been a reporter and just gone down to try to do the story as well.
There may be there's some truth to that, but at the same time, I think it's just, you remember, as I said earlier, we're the messenger of information. We put it out there, and we hope for the best at times. That's all we can do. But what an honor it was for me to be able to report that story. And Raul Garcia, which is Primitivo Garcia's one of his older brothers, he was the one that brought that story to me. But he would come by the station. He wanted to see me edit that story. And I told him, well, I can't really let you do that. I'm hoping you're going to like the end of that story.
Yeah.
But once I get it edited, but he was anxious to see that story.
Yeah, and to make sure it was correct. But I think that's that trust factor again. I think everybody else just trusted that this was going to come out the right way. We all had issues during COVID. You had both a business and you had personal situation with COVID-19. Talk a little bit about that, maybe from whichever way you want to start, either the personal side with your daughter, Lisa, who became very sick, or with the newspaper and trying to keep it afloat during those times when all the advertising started to dry up.
Well, when we were hit with COVID, it was just a matter of a week or two that we lost our first person. His name was Roberto Lopez, and he was the first one that we knew that had passed away of COVID in our community. Came from a large family, and I knew him personally. In fact, at one time he worked for me for a short period of time, and a great guy. And he'd just gotten married, had one child, and that was really, really painful for the community. To have to go through this. And really, people still weren't sure what this was.
Yeah, should I get the vaccine? Shouldn't I get the vaccine? All those questions were still at the very beginning, yeah.
And so, I spoke with Roberto's mother. I interviewed her. It was very difficult for us to interview her, but at the same time, she wanted to share that story about her son. And, she just was in a lot of pain. But at the same time, I think that she just felt the need to warn other people about this epidemic that we had here in the United States and around the world, and to take it seriously as well. About a year later, personally, my daughter Lisa also caught COVID at her job. Well, we think it's her job, but we're not quite sure. But she really suffered a lot, and it's really, really difficult. She had COVID and other health issues. She was in the hospital for about nearly 3 months. And we nearly lost her. She came so close to death that we had to have a priest come in and give her last rites. And, as a parent, you never want to go through that.
No.
You never want to go through that. I would, at times, it was just so hard because I couldn't see her at the hospital. She was in ICU, and they wouldn't allow us to go in. So I would sit in the parking lot.
Wow. Say your prayers in a lot and just hope for the best at that point.
Yeah, I would walk the corridors.
Yeah.
And but it was tough. It was
Yeah.
tough. And another thing that happened, right? Lisa was in the hospital. The community, and one of the band members of a band called Las Estrellas called me one day and says, "Hey, Joe, we want to do something for you and your family." And I said, he wanted to do a fundraiser. And I said, "No, I don't think I'm interested in that." I says, as a parent, I can handle this. I'm going to help her. She's married. She had children. Mm-hmm. And I had to call a friend of mine that also had lost her son to another different situation. And I asked her, well, I have some people that want to do a fundraiser for my daughter, but I don't feel as though I'm interested in that because I'm supposed to be the provider for my family, And she says, Joe, she says, you need to swallow your pride. She goes, it's not about you, And I share this story now because if anyone's in this situation, maybe they can learn from what I'm about to say. So the person says, it's not about you. It's about your daughter. You do not know what she's going to need after she comes home. Mm-hmm. You don't know if she needs a wheelchair. You don't know if she's going to need a certain recliner, a certain bed. So you don't know what those things are going to detail. So, please allow the community. They want to do something for you because you've done so much for the community. But that was the largest, hardest pill to swallow.
Yeah. Well, you're a proud man. That's why. You've always done everything from the beginning of your life all the way through helping your mom, all the way through that you had to take care of your mom once you got out of high school and the whole thing and took that burden upon yourself. So it's the way you felt, hey, it's what I have to do. It's why we're here, type thing. And you're right. That's absolutely tough, Yeah. I think it's probably the toughest thing to have to accept is that you need help and to say, open your arms and say, I need help.
But what was really, everyone from the community, no matter where they lived at, north of the river, Kansas, Missouri, police officers, they all came and chipped in. They had a big fundraiser, enchilada fundraiser.
Perfect.
At Guadalupe Center. And, everybody wanted to help. And it was a beautiful thing to see at the same time. And Lisa at that time was getting a little bit better. She was still in the hospital. She could not attend the fundraiser. But they did a wonderful job, and we're just so appreciative, my wife and I and my daughter Rachel, and Lisa is as well, that people would do this for our family.
Yeah, and Lisa is still, she's still suffering from the after effects of COVID, even after all this time, right? I mean, she's...
Her stamina
do they call it long COVID?
Yes.
I forget, they dubbed it something, I think it was long COVID. But her stamina is probably not great, right?
It's getting better, but at the same time, it's still an issue.
Yeah? And she has little kids. Kids still. They're probably not that little anymore, right?
No.
Yeah, that's right. And so you and your wife, Ramona, and Rachel probably are a big help for her to lean on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so the other story I think was huge was we've celebrated a few Super Bowls here. And the last Super Bowl we celebrated ended up in gunfire. And we lost... I'm going to let you tell the story, okay? Because we lost somebody who's very near and dear to your heart, Lisa Lopez-Galvin. And it still resonates today with this entire community because of the kind of person she was. She got just hit wrong place, wrong time. And it was just devastating to everyone.
Absolutely.
Because now all of a sudden it becomes a national story about Kansas City that they're celebrating a Super Bowl parade and somebody ends up getting shot and killed. Other people end up getting shot and wounded and whatever. And it just puts that pall over top of the whole thing. So talk a little bit about Lisa and your history with her goes back a while. So,
well, Lisa's family and our family go back, decades. And when I first got word of this, I was getting basically a play-by-play during that time that the shooting took place. And I was getting calls after calls after calls about her situation. Had she made it? Had she not made it? It was a very difficult. It was very hard to believe that that it happened to anyone. But we knew Lisa and her community involvement in our community. So when we finally got the final statement that she had passed, because there was so many different, a lot of information was going back and forth.
You didn't know what to
confirm. I couldn't confirm her passing, and I couldn't write about that. I had to confirm it. I had to hear it. As journalists, we have to hear these things in order to write to it. Yeah. And so finally, I learned that she had passed, and it was devastating. And I knew her father. And my daughter Rachel also grew up with Lisa, and Rachel went over to the house that same day that we learned that she had passed to her parents' house. And then her dad, his name is Beto Lopez Sr., he says, "Where's your dad?" And he says, "Well, he's at home." She goes, "Well, I'm going to talk to your dad." So I went to visit him the following day. I didn't ask him anything about what was going on. I didn't go there as a journalist. I had to take my cap off. The first time ever in 54 years I had to take my journalist cap off. I had to be a friend to him. I had to share. I just had to be there for him. He wanted to see me. He wanted to talk to me, but not as a journalist. He wanted to talk to me as a friend, you know. And I spent a couple of hours with him, and we talked, and we visited, and had something to eat. And it was devastating for the family. And she has a large family. Mm-hmm. And so,
she was so well loved in the community.
Oh, absolutely, you know, and she knew how to give back to the community. That was one of the things, you know. Yes, she was a DJ on radio, but she was also a DJ in the community before even getting into radio, and she had been doing that, and she was also volunteered her time with baseball teams, with basketball teams, and what have you. And she played a little baseball in her day as well. So, you know, she was a very well-rounded person. She just loves people, and she was just enjoyed life to its fullest.
Right. And I think it's the only time, KC Hispanic News, we have it right here, hold up for, you dedicated an entire issue to one story, one person, basically, right?
Exactly. There was so much information, and everybody wanted to they were submitting information to us. My staff and we basically visited one morning on a Saturday morning. Paper comes out on Thursday. We says, you know, we have to figure out a way to do the stories, you know, all of them as much as we can, and get different perspectives of that. And if you read the headliner, it says why. Yeah. You know, that says they're all. Why did this happen?
Right. And why did she get hit with the only fatal bullet from that day? Mm-hmm. You know, I know some people say, and I think the fact that you went to visit the family and your daughter went to visit the family says everything. Because sometimes, you know, you don't know what to do. You just, they're grieving, and I'll let them grieve. Or,
as a reporter, we don't know what to do.
I'm interfering. I don't know, because you're thinking reporter friend, reporter friend, but this is things that people I think out there have to know, that people need you. We're need human. Their friends.
We're human.
We're human. You don't want to be isolated at that time. You want other people to come in and share your grief with you. Mm-hmm. I think at that point.
Exactly.
I think that's a big thing, and I think that's why he went over. And I think prior to that, you even did an interview with her dad. Okay, and she's sitting there with her and her at the same time. She was a DJ, and she was a typical kid when she was young. She liked the 80s rock and roll and did all that. But when she became a DJ, I think she learned from her father, who was a mariachi band member, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That she got away from the rock and roll and started to do, the
Hano music, and she loved the mariachi music, you know, and she wanted her father to know that. This is why we wrote the story. She wanted to know that for her father, Beto, to know that she really appreciated the fact that he taught her music. Mm-hmm. You know, she didn't play an instrument, and he played trumpet, and she couldn't play an instrument even if she wanted to, but she was not musically inclined there. But she loved all sorts of music, all sorts of genre. And so she just wanted to tell her dad thank you. And she did it to our paper. And, you know, I held that story. You know how sometimes we have evergreens. We'll do
exactly.
A story.
Well, we do the same thing here, Joe.
You mean to tell me I'm not going to go in?
Well, you know, you might make it for Hispanic month next year. Okay, one of those deals. No, we'll have it on before that, please.
But, she... So, she would call me. She would say, Joe, she goes, are you about ready to run that story? And I go, yeah, I'm about ready to. Maybe within the next week or two, And I believe it was just a matter of about less than 6 months that she passed after we ran that story.
After you ran that story.
But she was so grateful. In fact, I still have it on my phone. She texted me with so much appreciation after she read the story, She was just so appreciative that her dad got that message.
Yeah.
That she loved him and appreciated everything that he had done for her.
Right. He was so appreciative, too, that was the way. Because sometimes the kids don't communicate that way. Exactly. I think we have a feeling that we know they love us or whatever, but you always wonder what you have imparted on them as they go off into their own adulthood.
Well, you think that's bad, Frank. I think you and I have gone through this. I used to tell my kids, I was on television at one time. Oh, yeah, sure, Dad.
Yeah, I know, exact same thing. Right? Yes. In fact, a couple of my daughters were thinking about doing it, and after a while they went, nah, never mind. It doesn't look like that much fun. Because you have to be honest with them. As much as you see us on TV and think, oh, wow, what a great job. I'm interviewing George Brett or Tom Watson or Eric Hosmer or Alex Gordon or whatever.
Right.
They just think, oh, my gosh. But everybody out there thinks that my kids are going, he's never home. Okay. He leaves at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, doesn't come home until 11 o'clock at night. One of those
exactly.
Deals. I see him in the morning before I go to school, and then that's it.
Right.
You people out there see him more than I see.
Well, in fact, I think we all share this too, is that, and I realized this as well, and that is that once I left television, it took me about a year or two to realize how much I missed in my daughter's lives.
Yes.
Because of the time that we spend in television, it's not just an 8 to 5 job.
No.
Sometimes you end up staying, depending on the story that you're working on. So, it is a demanding job.
Yeah, it is. It's not all it's cracked up to be, especially these days. So, yeah. And now the other thing for you, you now have spent more years with the Hispanic News, 28, than you did in TV, 26. True. But that's up to 54 years.
And growing.
And growing and continuing that you've been in the media. I mean, that is fantastic. That is just incredible. Some people don't last 50 days, let alone 54 years.
Right.
So, I mean, that is just, hats off to you. That's incredible.
I love what I do, though. If I can make a difference in someone's life, to me, that's really, really important. And the stories that we covered, we cover a little bit of everything. When people ask me, what type of stories you cover, we cover the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
You're
not afraid
I'm not
to
afraid.
cover the negative part of the news.
No. I did a story just recently, I think in the last 3 weeks, on breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And a lady called me. She was telling me her story about that. And then I made another contact. And I believe the lady lives here in Lenexa. She started a podcast where women can call in and they can talk about their issues, what they're going through with each other. And they can just do it on a podcast, our website, shall I say. And then and I asked her, because I've done these stories as well before, I said, well, what about the men? Because men go through breast cancer as well.
Yeah, they do, which people... Well, they forget. I think by now everybody's heard that men do. It's not very prolific. It's not like women's cancer, but it's still breast cancer.
Right. And what I learned in interviewing the person that had breast cancer, he didn't talk much about it because at first he was ashamed to talk about it. He didn't want nobody to know that he had breast cancer. But he also started a website sharing his story. Because it's something that some men do face, and they don't have outlets. And I said, well, why was that? You were scared to talk about it. He goes, because sometimes men have a tendency of being embarrassed about it. No, that just happens to women or what have you. So, but he started also a website to share his information.
Right.
Yeah.
See that?
And these were non-Hispanics, by the way. We had one lady that was Hispanic because it's also prevalent in our Latino community. But sometimes it's a perception that our paper, that we only want to talk to Hispanic people. We talk to all people.
Right. Absolutely. And part of this, the reason you can still tell these stories as we go back, and I passed over, it's my fault, Joe, I'm going to revert, is that you survived through COVID-19. Your daughter ended up surviving, but you survived through COVID-19 with this newspaper, despite the fact it was a very, very difficult time when all these other smaller businesses are going out of business, excuse me, because of lack of funds or funding or advertisers drying up or whatever. You continued on. Tell that story as well.
Well, it was just really important for me and our staff to get the message out there about COVID. Things were changing on a daily basis. Information was changing on a daily basis at the beginning of COVID. And I had to make sure that people had the latest information in both English and Spanish, because there's a lot of folks out there that don't read English, and we had to cater to both segments of our society. And so to me, that was an important element. I was kind of used to starting, when I first started the newspaper, I started it from my wallet. And
absolutely.
And so
that good Channel 4 money you remember. After all that time, okay.
Don't say that too loud. And so,
I'm going to tell McDonald. He might fire both of us still. He always threatened to fire us. So,
But the thing of it was is that we felt the need that we had to go ahead and continue to publish our paper. There was a lot of papers locally and nationally that had to cut back. Some of the newspapers that were weekly went to biweekly. I continued to go biweekly all the time that this was taking place, and to this day we continue to be a weekly newspaper.
Yeah, right. And to survive that was tough.
It was tough.
We talked to a lot of people in bigger businesses that had a tough time keeping people employed, because you just didn't know where their paycheck was going to come from.
Exactly.
You knew how important that paycheck was to them.
Yeah.
So
and everyone was calling us. People were calling us because they were living in fear with it. Hospitals and other medical facilities were wanting to make sure that we were getting the information out. They were making themselves available to us as well. So we had no choice,
right,
but to move forward.
Yeah.
And provide them the news that they needed. Well,
I'll tell you, the people who need you and love you, and you are on every board I think there is in Kansas City. You've been on every board everywhere, and of course I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Cesar Chavez Scholarship at the University of Central Missouri. Now, remember, folks, who said at the beginning, Joe did not go to college, but he has been given an honorary doctorate, so he is Dr. Joe Arce, which I'm very, very proud to say, and I think that is terrific. But you set up a scholarship there at UCM. The school president wanted more Hispanics in their school population of students, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, and he asked me. He came to my office. We visited, and I asked him if it was possible, but that they had to invest in our community. And he said, "How do we go about that?" And so I said, we can name a scholarship after an American hero, Cesar Chavez.
Right.
He liked the idea. We ran with it. So the first scholarship that we offered was one scholarship for $10,000.
It's a nice scholarship
for a student, yeah. And so we went from that, and then over the years, I continued to grow it. About 2 or 3 years later, I asked for a second one, and then a third one, and then finally we went to a fourth one. In 2022, we went to a fourth one, and I am proud to say that from that initial meeting that we had to create the Cesar E. Chavez Scholarship to today, the university has invested $500,000 into our Latino community for area students.
Right. That gives those kids motivation. I mean, there's something out there for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, not for anybody else. It's for you. You do your due diligence in the classroom and do everything else. There's probably volunteerism involved in it as well, and you do your due diligence, and you could get a college education.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the things that I think that us media people. It's just not me. I'm sure you do the same thing. There's just certain things that we as journalists want to get involved with. We have maybe something that touches our heart that we want to go on a board or something like that. And it's expected of us as well. So something like that. It comes with the territory.
Mm-hmm. It does.
As well. But I enjoy it. I feel very rewarded by giving back to the community. At one time, I served on Planning Commission of City of Gladstone for 10 years.
Oh, God.
and then I said to myself one day, what am I doing here? I think my community needs me. And so I decided to go back into the community and serve on boards. I've served on the Guadalupe Center board. Yeah. I have served on the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce board. I even created an organization along with other media folks called the Hispanic Media Association of Greater Kansas City. As well, And now, at my age, 70 plus.
Hey, Joe, 70 plus. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. What I do now, when people ask me to serve on the board, I flat out just don't know. And they say, well, you think about it. I say, well, what part of the no do you not understand? The end or the O? But no, what I want to do now is offer those opportunities to a younger generation. Yeah. I want the younger generation to get some of those great feelings that we get as serving on boards, because like I said, it's very rewarding to see an agency grow and you had something to do with it. I go back to the days when Guadalupe Center had the small building there on Avenida Cesar Chavez, and I was part of the expansion. But it's so nice to see that expansion, the people in there. I played a little part in that. Yeah. And but my duty there, it's done. I enjoy the time there. I served about 20 years. So
I think you did.
I've done my time. I did my time.
Yeah, you did. You did, and have been blessed for it. But okay, so the future of KC Hispanic News. You can't do this forever. So I know you'll try, but do you have any? Are you thinking about maybe stepping down or stepping back a little bit? And who will take over for you at the KC Hispanic?
Well, there's good news and bad news there.
Whichever way you want to go, Joe, just go.
The good news is that I do have maybe a date when the World Cup comes to Kansas City.
When it comes or when it's done?
When it's done.
Okay.
That's when I will be done.
Okay.
I want to be a part of that. I want our readers to experience that with us. So
because that's my goal right now. Right, the international flavor of that is right up your alley.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's my target year, so to speak, in 26. And but as far as having someone else take over the paper, I'm not sure about that yet, to be honest with you, because we are considered an alternative newspaper.
Yes.
And so what happens sometimes, not always, but I believe, and I don't say this to toot my horn, but we have a good reputation. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't want that reputation ruined by someone else that takes over the name and the paper. And it doesn't take much these days for something to go wrong. Mm-hmm. So I've thought about just the fact when I leave, the paper will go with me.
Oh, my gosh, Joe. I don't think the people in the Hispanic community are going to like that news right now. You can't get one of those kids that was on the Chavez scholarship at UCM to come in and say, hey, kid, guess what? We need you back here. Right. We need you back here.
Believe me, that I think about that a lot.
Yeah. So there's nobody really right now that you're grooming to take over that position?
If I would have groomed someone, it would have been my daughters, but, this dream was mine. It wasn't theirs. And both of my daughters worked for me when I first started the newspaper. And don't ask them how much they got paid. But they went on to their own careers and their own dreams. Lisa she dreamed about being a police officer since she was in high school. And then she went on to UMKC and got her degree in criminal justice. And so, this is what she wanted to do. My other daughter, Rachel, she went to the insurance industry, and she's been there ever since. And so I can't force that upon them. I got grandkids, and I like to groom one of them, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Sure, but
so no one in the community yet has come. Like you probably told other people that 2026 maybe you're in.
I have,
and
no one's going to be shocked,
right? But I mean, there's no one has come to you and said, "Well, what's going to happen?" And then you probably have told them the exact same thing, but no one then has come back to you and say, "Joe, I think." It could continue on this way. That hasn't happened yet.
And I have people have approached me, but I'm not really wanting to have that discussion yet. I guess.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. So it's going to be a minute.
Yeah. It may be a last minute thing.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I think it'll be very difficult for the people in the Hispanic community to let this go. So I
think so. One of the proudest things I think that we do. If you had an opportunity to read our paper, we do a lot of in-depth reporting. We do a lot of exclusive interviews. Those are the type of things I think that separate us from pretty much any other papers. Some of the other papers, they chase our newspaper.
Yeah, sure they do.
As well. And but the thing of it is that I just, at times, maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot, but there's just so much news that out there that I just wish there was more people that were covering the Latino community because I find myself with some great stories, and it needs to be televised. It needs to be on radio and things of that nature. And I can't be everywhere.
Right.
That's the thing. And it's getting harder and harder because as I get a little bit older, I'm not
slowing down a little, Joe. Come on now.
I don't have the stamina that I once had.
Yeah, right.
But I'm always working. Whether it be in my office or at home. Like I'm known to call you at 10 o'clock at night. I'm known to call you on Sunday morning for an interview. I'm sure you've done the same thing. But this is what we do.
Sure. It's been your life.
Again, like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And most people retire at 65 or maybe 70, and here, I still keep on going for a little while longer.
I think there's a push behind both of us a little bit.
Yeah,
there's that hand in your back. Yours is from Ramona, mine's from Sarah. They don't want us around the house.
That's true.
Push us out.
But when she retired at the age of 49.
Oh, of course.
First thing I lost was my remote and my recliner,
and what you watch on TV from that point.
Exactly.
Okay, I can't thank you enough for coming in.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
This is wonderful. Your story had to be told, and especially about the success of the KC Hispanic News. But my lasting image of Joe Arce, you're gonna remember this, and I'm sure, is at it was WDAF at the Channel 4 parties or whatever, with a towel over your shoulder on the dance floor with Ramon.
Yes.
Do you still put the towel over your shoulder?
Not so often. We have slowed down a little bit, but it's just not you. I can still go to a dance or an event in the Hispanic community, and people will either offer me a towel or they'll start going down memory lane with remembering the fact that I danced with the towel. We would dance on the dance floor from the time the band started to the time it ended. We just love dancing.
Yeah. Well, the other great thing, Joe, is the Kansas City community will remember you for KC Hispanic News and then all the great things you did on television. So
I appreciate that.
It is just great. And you are one of the reasons we always say there's just something about Kansas City. God bless you, my friend. And
I appreciate
thanks for
it,
spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good man. Give the family my best.
Absolutely. You too.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is made possible by the generous support of local partners such as the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. For more information about how you can help us share these stories, visit our website at somethingaboutKC.org. Thank you.